Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us at the International Conference on Men's Issues. Sorry we can't be together in person as we were last year in Chicago. I'll be introducing a good friend, Sean Coleman. We're going to be talking about the Global Initiative for Boys and Men and what it can do for you in all of your efforts regarding men's and boys' issues. I just want to say that sadly, in Chicago was the last time I saw Mark Angelucci alive, though we spoke on the phone afterwards. And all of you know that story, and it's just sad that he is no longer with us. It's really a tragic situation that I still feel very deeply about. But certainly what he did for civil rights is a mission that will still continue. Let me introduce Sean Coleman to you. He's the president of the Global Initiative for Boys and Men. And as I said, we want to talk about what the Global Initiative for Boys and Men can do for you and your efforts. In other words, our mission really is not to provide services, but to bring attention to those who are providing services. Boys and men need a global initiative for boys and men to scale the same way girls and women's organizations have done for years, so we can serve boys and men equally. The American Association for University Women, for example, generates nearly $70 million annually. We need to advance boys and men through recognized programs that we can identify and hold accountable. I mean, not in terms of, how you're spending your money, right? But how the work you are doing is actually proven to be effective. And we want to show that effective organizations with outcome results can be identified and supported so that the few dollars that we have can stretch even further, build relationships between organizations, and serve as a resource center for organizations throughout the country, because one organization's success has a global impact for others. Sean, you want to sort of outline perhaps the 5 pillars of what specific areas that we want to support?
Yeah, thanks, Phil, and thanks for the introduction. And I'm really glad that I'm able to participate in this teleconference or telesummit maybe. So thank you again for inviting us. I really want to discuss what GIBM has identified as the 5 pillars of male well-being. Our focus is really on education, career, parenting, physical and emotional health, and recognizing the male narrative in the public discourse. Education of boys and men, really today's educational system, struggles to meet the needs of our sons. Over the past several decades, we've seen boys fall further behind in K-12 education, resulting in far fewer opportunities into colleges and universities. We're also seeing what Warren Farrell referred to as the purpose void for our young men who can't find career professions in non-college related careers. Data from the National Center for Educational Statistics and other sources, including the Pell Grant system, reveal we need to do far more for our sons. Pell, for instance, rightly spends money on women and men, but it spends over $6.4 billion more annually supporting girls and women. And we need to kind of change that philosophy and figure out how we can support our sons more with boy-friendly schools and policy changes that also can create girl-friendly schools with its policy changes. Our second pillar is careers in a changing world. We've really put this wonderful emphasis on trying to get women into STEM, but we haven't really responded equally for men in female-dominated professions. As our global economy changes, we need to see more men in non-traditional professions, including but not limited to nursing, education, mental health, communications, and other fields that provide men with more opportunities. I can tell you personally, I gave up my teaching position to support my wife's career. And I've been the primary caregiver. My wife has been the primary breadwinner. And it really was about coming together and working together. And it wasn't about who should do what. It's about what we should do together. And I think that's what GIBM is really interested in, is bringing people together by recognizing there are wonderful niches out there like National Parents Organization, the Gurion Institute, NCFM, that does this important work and how we could in turn support them. Our third pillar really is parenting, fatherhood, and family rights in the law. Boys and girls who grow up with a father and a mother are more likely to be involved parents themselves. Mothers of sons also need support trying to raise healthy sons. The family court system often pits one parent against another, leading to a long and contentious battle over custody and finances. Custodial rights, parental alienation, and paternal fraud must be recognized in all our courts to protect the rights of children, fathers, and mothers. Our fourth pillar, physical and emotional well-being. You know, the U.S. has a long history of not supporting the physical and emotional health of males. Programs for girls and women exist at the federal, state, and local levels, with no reciprocal programs for boys and men, or virtually no reciprocal programs for boys and men. Males account for 79% of the suicide deaths in the United States, and with our current COVID crisis, they are 60 to 70% of COVID-19 deaths. Men die 5 years younger and face a number of challenges related to physical and emotional health. You know, one of the challenges is there is not an office of men's health, although there is rightly an office of women's health, which ironically introduced Men's Health Month instead of an office of men's health doing it, because there wasn't one to do it. Supporting the well-being of boys and men at the federal, state, and local levels is paramount. An office of boys and men's health is a necessary start. And, you know, it's interesting that Phil was kind enough to bring up Mark Angelucci, and I was reading a recent, a 2008 ruling, Wood versus Horton, where Mark really helped get resources to men who are victims of domestic violence when they were turned away by shelters and other places, which gets to really our fifth and really important pillar, which is the male narrative in public discourse. A healthy male narrative is grossly underrepresented in public discourse and criminal justice, particularly in media, academia, the nonprofit sector, and government. We must change the narrative surrounding boys and men if we hope to help boys and men find strength, purpose, and success in family, career, and life. Public discourse must promote a positive male narrative and address male concerns more frequently and more earnestly. And one of those I would like to bring up later on after Phil talks is really the ACE survey and the failings of that survey to address, you know, fathers abused by mothers. Phil?
Yes, well, you know, these are, we worked on this for quite a while, you know, identifying the necessary 5 areas, for example, and they all have many other areas that are involved, of course. And we want to support those efforts of all organizations and individuals, for example, to look at shared parenting legislation, of course. I mean, as I said in Chicago last year, there's been some considerable progress. If I was told, say, 6 years ago that 21 states don't have some sort of shared parenting legislation, I would have said, boy, I don't think that's going to be possible. But yet, here we are, and 21 states do. Obviously, other states need to follow their example. Kentucky has probably the best shared parenting legislation as a template. But there are other states who they're not there. North Carolina, for example, is not there in terms of shared parenting legislation, despite the efforts of Molly Olson and others to get that passed. We want to support those kinds of efforts. We need to have if there's a women's commission, as it is at many state and federal levels, state and local levels, there certainly should be a commission for the needs of men. Why not? Men and boys. So there's a lot to do in terms of fatherhood, parenting, family rights, and the law, and also the health and well-being of boys and men, and changing the male narrative in the public discourse. That sounds like a big job, right? But there are many people doing it, writing op-eds, posting videos, doing all that kind of thing, and pointing out that the bias against males in the media and academia is evident and ongoing, and it needs to be fought against, and not just fought against, but answered, let's say, by good and thoughtful people.
And Phil, I wanted to, follow up on that a little bit. Domestic abuse is a perfect example. And Phil, who is really an expert in that arena, I like to call abused men the hidden side of domestic violence kind of Bible of understanding when it comes to domestic violence. And I think that we are culturally sensitized to accept domestic violence as a man's problem and a woman's burden. And we need to see it as a human problem and a human burden. And we haven't done that in the male narrative. And we need to do it. All of our groups see it. Recently interviewing a man who witnessed his mother physically abuse his father for years, and how that impacted his marriage, his ability to form his relationship with his wife and his children, and a man who longs for intimacy. A lot of this has been supported by the Adverse Child Experience Survey conducted by the CDC. And in that survey, there is really an essential flaw. And that essential flaw points to a question that asks, adults who, when they were children, did you witness your mother, your stepmother, or your father's girlfriend receive physical abuse? But there is no question that asks if they saw the father as the victim of abuse. And so much of the data that comes from this survey from the 90s, which is really used by many institutions as a survey tool, and the data from it to suggest why we need to support victims of domestic abuse, but it ignored in great part the abuse of men. And that kind of narrative needs to find itself in the public discourse, and as the Global Initiative of Boys and Men has done, has really gone after the CDC on this. And so,
yeah, and I in another book of mine, When Women Sexually Abuse Men, I looked greatly at the CDC data, and the data is there in terms of what type of abuse occurs for both men and boys and women and girls. It's there, but buried intentionally. In other words, they've got graphs and headlines pointing out how many women are abused. If you look further, though, there's equal numbers of men and boys being abused, but it's buried, and it's intentionally buried. You can tell by reading their data. There's a big graph on one, and here, kind of buried is the other half of the story. And half the truth is as good as a whole lie. And then there's questions that they don't ask. Again, as you pointed out in the ACE survey. And I think that's perhaps intentional as well. What's not asked is as important as what is asked. For example, they don't ask a question about scalding, right, which is obviously abuse, but they don't ask the question. It is anecdotally true that probably more men experience that type of abuse than do women. We don't know because the question isn't asked, right? Another question that they should have asked is, did you have someone else did someone else of your intimate partner, did they encourage or pay someone else to harm you? In other words, getting another person to do the harm as opposed to you doing the harm directly. That question is not asked. I think from anecdotal experience, men are more likely to have that kind of thing happening to them than women are, but we don't know because the Centers for Disease Control has not so far asked that question. Another thing the CDC does is it only has women doing the interviewing. These surveys are done by phone. Doing the interviewing. They only hire women to ask the questions. Well, we know that in terms of sexual abuse, at least, men are more likely to reveal that to other men than to a woman asking the question. Not only is this discrimination in terms of hiring, and blatantly so by a federal agency, it does a disservice in terms of getting accurate results.
Thank you, Phil, for that. And I really appreciate Phil bringing that to us attention, because it really, I think what Phil is able to do is encapsulate the way media, academia, and government collectively subvert the male narrative. And it's not that we shouldn't be supporting girls and women in these issues. We absolutely should. But over the last 35 years, we have just seen a real challenge for boys and men in all of our 5 pillars. And so I think it's important that we really focus on them. And that's what the Global Initiative for Boys and Men hopes to do, is support those groups that are able to provide services in those arenas.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us for the second part of the Global Initiative for Boys and Men presentation. And I really wanted to touch on something that we addressed earlier, and that is really the importance of niche groups and our willingness to help those groups. I wanted to provide one small example, and that is with the Gurion Institute Helping Boys Thrive Summit. GIBM is funding educators to attend this virtual summit so that they can bring information back to their school districts and to their schools regarding how to better help our sons in school, and our daughters, for a matter of fact. So I think that gives you an idea of what GIBM really wants to do. It wants to work with groups that are finding success, having success, and support them. And that can happen if we really do collectively work together. And what I would like to do is pass this off to Phil Cook now, so he can discuss one of the most important pillars for the Global Initiative for Boys and Men that I think we can all embrace. And that is the male narrative in the public discourse. Phil?
Yeah, thank you, Sean. One of the things that could be done, for example, going back to your first point there in helping groups succeed without, creating a big bureaucracy or taking away from the central mission of these various groups that many, of course, you folks at the International Conference for Men's Issues are involved in. If, for example, suppose all these groups got together, gave a small amount of money to get a public relations firm involved. With each person or each organization contributing, then it's not such a huge, one thing, big pile of money that needs to be raised. And if we have a good public relations firm, for example, doing that, then a lot of people can contribute and increase our social media presence or mainstream media presence, do more radio talk shows and so on. So that's an idea that we're also pursuing. One of the things, of course, that's so important is that we got to insist that academia, media, and government attention needs to be brought to bear to areas affecting the well-being of boys and men. And certainly we need a long-time goal is to create an office of men's health. It's hilarious that International Men's Health Day was announced by the Office of Women's Health because there is no National Office of Men's Health. That's just wrong. One of the other things we could do certainly also is begin to look at politicians, and then that's not just federal politicians or presidents, but state and local too. We need to ask them specific questions about how they stand on issues affecting boys and men. And if you're going to make a statement about that, then put it on your website. So we need to produce reports on the status of boys and men and recognize that politicians need to basically start paying attention to the issues affecting boys and men. And of course, what those issues are. At least this group does. The greater suicide rate, the greater dropout rate, the more punishments meted out to boys in school compared to girls, and all those issues. And we need to basically hit some of these politicians over the head a little bit, and ask them direct questions. So that's one of the things that we need to do and that we want to support. Another thing is, maybe I'll throw it back to you, Sean, we need to establish state commissions on the status of boys and men. They already exist for women and girls. Why don't you speak about that?
Yeah, thank you, Phil, for bringing that up. And I do think it's important that we continue to support our women and girls with these commissions. We must also include one for boys and men who are falling further and further behind, especially in education and health. And we really need to address this issue on a state level, like Phil has said, and on a federal level. But to go back to something that Phil addressed, is having a sort of cooperative group of entities that collectively work with a PR firm to promote important information regarding the lives of boys and men is really, really central, so that we have a sustained, consistent narrative from many different groups about the status of boys and men and the women who love them. And I think if we can do that, we can really work together, and no one has to compromise their individual entity. It's important that we have National Parents Organization. It's important that we have NCFM. It's important that we have the Goering Institute. It's important that we have the Global Initiative for Boys and Men, and so many groups that are doing wonderful work that do not have to compromise their group's work. And so I think, going back to what Phil said, working together as a cooperatively, it becomes very affordable now to have a constant, consistent narrative about the status of boys and men in media, whether it be print, public, and honestly, podcasting. Podcasting is incredibly important. And so now imagine this sustained narrative through social media, various news outlets, and podcasting over social media. But to get back to Phil's other point, and that is the Commission on the Status of Boys and Men in the state of California, which is something we are going to be pushing hard for. The project will be led by Mark Sutton, who is our project manager on this and has made some inroads already. And so I think we really need to take stock with this, and we are going to be working with other people in our group to gather the necessary information and reinforce the information we've gathered over the last year about the status of boys and men in the state of California. The state does have a commission on the status of women and girls, and we believe it is a violation of state law not to have a commission on the status of boys and men. And so when we looked at all the data, we've already seen appellate courts make rulings saying that it is unconstitutional to have programs that selectively choose one gender over the other. One simple case would be Wood versus Horton, which was held by the great Mark Angelucci, who we lost earlier this year. And his inroad into domestic violence against men now forced the state of California to provide them with shelter resources. And although it wasn't perfect, it was a step forward. And in that appellate court ruling, it said that you cannot violate based on gender the group of any individual group. And so please join us and help us in establishing this commission, because we really do believe that it will be a game changer nationally if we can do it here in California. Phil?
Absolutely. And if that starts there and a ball rolling downhill, because these commissions exist pretty much in every state and even in many local political entities and county level as well. So getting started in California, which is a big state, will certainly mean that other commissions that are exclusively for women and girls and nothing for boys and men will begin to be established. I just want to say thank you so much for watching what we have to say about the Global Initiative for Boys and Men. Hope you're going to be supportive. And, folks, get in touch. We'll get back to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Phil, for that. And, one thing I did want to point out is that we actually want to bring your groups to a national attention as well. That the hope is that organizations will be reaching out to us when they are looking for experts in different arenas, whether it be education, physical and emotional health, careers, the male narrative in the public discourse. Groups will start reaching out to us the more connected we are. And so we will be able to recognize your groups and in a way that gets them media attention. And so if we collectively work together. So we hope you will join us, and thank you for listening to this presentation on the Global Initiative for Boys and Men. We appreciate the work all of you do, and please do not hesitate to reach out to us. You can email me directly at seank@gibm.us or Phil Cook at philcook@gibm.us. Thank you so much for your time, and we appreciate it.
Thank you.